First off today, we have my ship, piloted by me, the Eidolon Shield variant, versus Krupp's Potassium, which is a primarily shielded railfan. And, okay, so my design is, the typical avoider, but it has large shields, which are good against rails. Because rails deal a lot of their damage through penetration, just through your opponent. If shields block that, it means that they lose a large portion of their damage and penetration overall. Because, they don't pierce shields. They just get stopped by them. So this is kind of in my favor, in a certain sense, which is kind of silly because normally you would think that large shields or walls are counted by railfans. So it's kind of amusing in a certain sense. And what I was trying to do the entire time is ram Corrupt, because that way he cannot fan and cannot deal damage to me, because he can only fire all of his rails, which then just bounce off the shields. And I can continue to fire and slowly pressure the shields. Now, normally having disruptors might help, but the thing is I would take damage on the way to Corrupt, and then he might kill me in 2 shots, which would not be good, even if I can get through the shields really easily with my disruptors. So I win that. Corrupt forfeits by self-destruction, and then we speed up and I move on to fight my next opponent, which is Milky's the Prospanche, which probably means something I don't know. So let's hope it's not a swear word. Anyhow, he's using a orbital wall, which is a wall that goes really fast in one direction. And normally these are really strong against the ships I'm using, because if you can't avoid and spread damage over the shields, that's not actually good, because that's the whole point of the ship. So for some reason he keeps switching targets. First he was firing at my left reactor, then started firing at my central one, which that's not great because you always want to get through the shields they're super heavy. And I think ideally for this situation you'd have more disruptors, because as you can see the shields keep coming back online. I have let's see, I have a lot of shields anyway, and having 6 large shields and that many small shields is just really problematic if your main damage is cannons, because cannons have the same principle as rails. They largely don't pierce shields, which means they lose a ton of their damage, and they can't actually start fires as well. Now, I did have a lot of fires on my ship at the time, which as you can see, but the thing is they weren't killing anything, and they weren't even bringing the weapons offline, so I was mostly undamaged, unhindered this fight. Quick combat spin to make it so that I don't get flanked, which is problematic because if your opponent doesn't take damage as you take damage, it means that you lose your ability to really fight back because you can't deal as much damage in the same amount of time. Which, it kind of sounds obvious, but your DPS actually matters a lot in this game. At least when you're playing competitively, and especially against designs that have such heavy shield usage. You always need to be able to pressure the shields and turn them off, and if you can't, then you kind of have a problem. And Milky forfeits, getting both segments of his ship stuck on the rocks. Next up we have Kawa using my ship, the Scion of Glory. Keep in mind this was practicing for the tournament. Versus Zipzap using the bootleg IGBM, Intergalactic Ballistic Missile, I believe. And these are both nuke ships. And nukes are dodged by largely strafing relative to the nukes, being perpendicular to them and moving forward. Basically makes it so you can't be hit by nukes. So Kawa is going to be strafing at all times, or he should be anyway, and Zipzap is going to be trying to run in circles while also simultaneously charging, because the issue is he needs to get close to actually have the nukes have a chance of hitting Kawa. Otherwise he's just going to always be dodged, because if you maintain range from a nuke ship and continue strafing, they're always going to have an issue. See, here's a good chance for the nukes to hit, and they all catch on the corner. Oh, that hurts really bad. And I think Zipzap is giving up, understandable. That is not a fun feeling. Especially, it looked like since all of those were gonna hit. So Zip Zap forfeits, understandably, I stress. So Kawa is moving to fight Rapier, which is Happy Cow Dance's ship. Love the elegant, simplistic paint, just the 4 colors. And these are also Nuke ships. And I'm not really sure how to classify Happy Cow Dance's ship, because it has like avoider thrust sections, as you can see, but is set up in a somewhat bargy fashion. So for this particular match, I'm not actually sure who wins, because Kawa is slower but has better armor, better defenses, and has also used some of the nukes, so he's on lower ammo. But Happy Cow Dance is reactive, faster, lighter, so he can't take as many hits, but he can, you know, dodge more hits. But then Kawa also does have the small lasers, which could eventually wear away the opponent's ship if neither of them hit each other with the nukes. So they're both doing a very good job dodging the nukes. This is a relatively difficult thing if you're uninitiated to the game, at least based on what I've seen. Lots of people seem to really struggle with dodging nukes because they just they fly backwards, which isn't always the best idea. If you're flying backwards, the nukes kind of will hit you, like less of them, but ideally I think you always want to be maintaining strafe and momentum to dodge them. Part of the strength of Kawa's ship, the Scion of Glory, my ship, I guess, is that as a wall it can rotate, and suddenly the nukes are now aiming at something that's very hard to hit, like as you can see there. And so you see nukes have to aim based on where your opponent is. Like if you target them, you have to target something on your opponent's ship, like a reactor for example. So for the wall, if you just rotate, if you like aim at the right corner and then Kawa rotates like that, then none of them are gonna hit. If you aim at the left corner, you might get lucky, but your opponent can usually read where you're aiming at based on where the nukes are targeting. Kawa dropped his momentum there, and because they were aimed at Kawa's center of mass, the nukes were, Happy Cow Dance's nukes were, they all hit him. Because Kawa, I think, was assuming that Happy Cow Dance would fire at the corners and then would rotate again, because he did rotate, of course. But then, because he didn't have any momentum to dodge them like that, then they all just kind of missed. Kawa using the boost to probably get better dodging, I would assume. And as you can see, both of them are taking a few hits, but mostly not taking like the catastrophic nuke hits that get clipped from time to time. I'm sure you've seen them. There's one in particular where like a rail fan is just cut in half, because nukes have like the highest damage. Technically mines can theoretically do more damage, but nukes are a close second and hugely more consistent. So the small lasers bringing in a few kills, the asteroid preventing Kawa from taking a proper dodging maneuver. His reactor kind of exposed. That's actually what the small lasers are for, is to fire at reactors like that one that are exposed, but you know, your opponent won't be hit by nukes anytime soon. And I think the small lasers have probably done a similar amount of damage to the nukes, which is kind of surprising since there's only 16 on that ship. They're very useful. Nukes coming from a second match, I think, in the background. Kawa taking more damage, barely avoiding it, and mostly not avoiding it that time. And that's the advantage of Happy Cow Dance's ship, is that it doesn't need to rotate because it just has so much strafe and it's so light. Kawa needs to like rotate and take breaks from fighting, essentially to reload, to reposition. But Happy Cow Dance, because he's spending so much time like strafing and has such reactive thrust, can basically just always do what he wants wherever he is. He doesn't rely on rotating, or at least not to the same degree, to dodge. Happy Cow Dance unfortunately hitting the asteroid with nukes, and then if you're close enough to nukes that you launch, they will damage you. So he loses a section there. More nuke misfires, and unfortunately I think he's out of ammo at this point. Kawa using... no, he still has at least one more volley. I'm pretty sure that... oh, well, I see interruption from the second match. I'm pretty sure that Kawa is out of ammo for sure, and it just has to rely on the small lasers from here on out. Whereas Happy Cow Dance has a few more volleys, but the thing is, Kawa, as he gets lighter and lighter, becomes more and more adept at dodging, as Happy Cow Dance has done. But the issue is that Happy Cow Dance can't like pressure passively like Kawa can with the small lasers. Though those might run out of energy soon, which would put this in a stalemate, in which case I think Kawa still wins because he can push more effectively. But Happy Cow Dance forfeits here, yeah. For our third match, we have me using Kawa's ship, the Blue Pages, versus Milky's ship, the Ion Avoider. And this is the quintessential orbital wall. And as you can see, the opponent can't maintain range because they got stuck on an asteroid. And here's what I mean about having high enough disruptor counts. As you can see, it just rips through the shields. Like, it doesn't even care. They're not even there, effectively. And that's another reactor going, and two, and Milky is just entirely dead, understandably forfeits. And the ship is just gone. Okay, so for the next section, since I took effectively no damage, is versus Corrupt's, the Blood of Slight Success, whatever that means. Interesting evocative name. Dodging nukes. Well, Corrupt doesn't. Yes, the ship is very, very fast and pretty decent at dodging nukes since it can just like completely reposition. And as you know, nukes must be fired based on an opponent's position. So if you have ships that are just this ridiculously fast, you can always dodge nukes. The caveat is that you will make yourself exposed to taking damage as soon as you go into the fight, because you're facing down an opponent, their nukes are facing directly at you. Corrupt forfeits by self-destruct. And then I fly in circles for a little bit, waiting for X-Snow to respond. Was presumably AFK, and then I go fight him. So, even though this is like a counter, X-Snow knows what he's doing and is very effective at fighting these. I imagine he practiced against Kawa, which is a superior pilot of the ship, it being his. And the other thing is that X-Snow ship has a ton of frontal armor. Like compared to Eidolon, which I think is one of its weaknesses, is that in the mirror match against orbital walls, or not a mirror match, but in the match against orbital walls, since it has so little armor, it cannot tank at all. It can't tank at all because it just goes straight through the armor. I think the X-Snow has roughly 1.5 times as much to 2 times as much, so it makes it so it's a lot more effective at surviving this type of ram, where it's just you're in your opponent's face and trying to kill them. And X-Snow is doing a good job. He knows that the hook I have is on my right side, so if he strafes to the left, it's very difficult for me to get a good grip. And as you can see, I'm taking really long to get to the reactor, much longer than the ship takes for, anything else, which is probably due to my own piloting mistakes, which I'm not aware of, which is part of the problem. And I am going to get a reactor, but I've taken a ton of damage. My left section is basically entirely dead, my right section, or my central section, is almost dead. It's actively taking damage. And I was trying desperately to get the control room on his left side, but it wasn't going well, and the gambit has yet to pay off because I didn't actually kill it yet. So I'm trying my best to fire to try and kill it. As you can see, all the weapons are rotated to the left, firing at it, trying to disable it. Because if I can do that, then X-Snow's ship will turn off for a second, and as he desperately tries to turn things back on, hey, it's the same match, here's the interruption again, but on our side. And yeah, even though X-Snow did manage to turn things off fast enough, and his ship was in such a position that I could not easily get to the control room. So it's just that one segment versus my one segment, for the most part. And I have to run away since his disruptors have turned everything off. And that segment is largely dead. It has a few thrusters left, a few cannons, but it can't really do much, so it's not a reliable choice, I think. And X-Snow almost kills it just because the disruptors can rip through the shield so quickly. And then I'm trying to get him against the asteroid. That's really good if I can get him stuck there. See, if he was stuck in that position, it'd be great, but then I get, oh, it hurts. I get stuck on the asteroid. X-Snow, knowing what he's doing, pushes me onto it, so it's harder for me to get off. So at this point, I completely abandoned trying to get the main one off. It'd be too slow. I switched to the other ship, and I was trying to use this one remaining cannon to get to the reactor. And it wasn't effective. X-Snow gets the control room of the other segment, so that's, 100% dead. And he gets away before the cannon can kill the reactor. It gets one more extra shot, but I don't think that I'll be able to get behind him. And I don't. I forfeit there, and X-Snow wins. Alright, for our fourth match, we have my ship, the Eidolon Shield variant, of course, versus Milky's the Unnamed Modem. And this is a rail spinner, and this is something I was very curious, very much wanting to test. Because rail spinners are known for having like very high rail DPS because they can typically fit more small rails, and smaller rails are of course more damage efficient. Accelerators aren't actually nearly as efficient as just adding another rail, which I don't think is super well known, but anyway, the obvious implications for this is that if my ship wants to be good against rails, it needs to be able to win in this. So this was a very useful test that I've been wanting to find out for a while now. So the idea here that I'm doing is by ramming, I'm preventing him from firing on one location. And ideally, if I am ramming him hard enough, which my ship doesn't have the thrusters to do, I can just stop the spin entirely, making it so he can't fire back at all. So here, as you can see, I'm slowly getting dislodged. I'm managing to do a lot of damage, and I might like take rails off because I'm so close. But as you can see, my ship gets thrown off and he can start spinning again. And that's partially because as I take off more and more armor, his speed improves such that it's harder and harder for me to actually keep up. Which is very funny, I think, in that by killing my opponent, I'm giving him a better position against me. So it's kind of difficult to try and maintain the damage on one specific area because it's spinning. If I'm trying to like focus a hole into one segment, then by the time it gets back around, then I'm just firing at the other side, the wrong side. So at this point I was always just firing at the closest railgun segment, and I was trying to get attached to his ship again. It's because by doing that you actually you allow your shields to recharge because the rails spend more time not firing at you. And as you can see, if I can always just keep grabbing onto him for my shields to recharge, then I'm not taking damage effectively. And if I can't manage to get the shields to recharge, if I can't pull off a proper hook maneuver or whatever, or ram I guess, then the rails can just start chewing into my ship again, and I have to tilt to stop that. So both of us have not taken any damage this far. I mean, I've probably taken a little bit more than him since he just has armor, and that's a lot more damage. As you can see, that's the downside of ramming him if he's going too fast, is that my ship will just be thrown. Like all that spinning momentum is imparted onto my ship, and then it's difficult to undo it to get back into my own control. So I think I wasn't able to rotate fast enough because I was like dealing with the momentum he had imparted on me. So now I'm starting to take out rails, just as a form of revenge, I'm sure. And I have 4 down of his 12. That sounds right. But he has an entire third of my ship down in terms of firepower and defenses, and that's 2/3 of my ship down. I lose control there, which is kind of really bad because if I don't have my shields in the way, then I just die. And now this is a problem because if I need 2 segments to like properly spread damage, if I only have 1, then I can't like do anything to mitigate it. That was really bad. If he'd been aiming there at my reactor there, it would have killed me. So I kind of have to back off in a certain sense to try and prevent him from hurting me further. The reactor going out because of fire is really good though. It means his ship isn't spinning as fast. It means he isn't firing as fast. I'm trying to get the other rail segments, and because there's like this massive gaping hole in one of the sides now, I can fire through that, or try to, and it's not going super well because it's a very tiny hole and he's moving super fast. But the other thing is that his ship, well, it comes apart now. That's kind of a bad sign, is that he didn't have very much control over it throughout the fight, which is unfortunate. That central section is supposed to be maneuvering him so he can move better, like back into the ring, of course. But the issue with that is that I think he had too much spin, so he couldn't get back into the ring. And now, because of how it's built, it could not turn, and he now has no middle section and loses all of his control rooms and loses. The next match is me versus Kawa. This was a sparring match. I'm using the Scion Glory and Kawa is using the predecessor of Shame, which was a idea we had of using the Scion of Glory type archetype, which is a nuke avoider, but instead of using small lasers, used rails, because you see they're a lot more reactive. And so as I previously discussed, these ships are very good at dodging nukes, and so we were just kind of strafing around each other. I'm pretty sure I had more practice at this point, which could explain why Kawa just clipped a nuke on his corner there. And it's kind of a boring matchup a little bit at times, because you just after you fire, both participants just kind of back off and wait for the nukes to reload. Whereas in other matchups, other opponents don't take as long to refire. So here I was using multiple hotkeys of nukes, because that way it typically covers a wider amount of space, which is harder to dodge. Here I use my boost to try and get close, and then by ramming Kawa, he can't dodge. So now I back off before he fires back, or I try to back off before he fires back, but then he uses his boost. And oh man, I barely dodged a lot of those nukes. I thought I was going to take a lot more damage than that. But yeah, this concept didn't get to be used in tournament, unfortunately, because it kind of wasn't a good idea when there was, that many rails. But it was very exciting, because the railguns are a lot better at picking out targets, because they fire so much faster, even if that's less total consistent damage. Like you can see here, if I could have gotten that reactor, if I had rails, I'm pretty sure I could get that reactor a lot more easily, since the lasers take time to travel. And then Kawa is dodging semi-effectively, and he's going to have an easier time of it, because as you get smaller, it's harder for the nukes to hit you. My small lasers are now targeting different things. That's the one of the main positives, I think, of using small lasers instead of rails, is that they can always be applying pressure. In fact, you can, if you take a second to stop piloting the ship, you can actually target them onto multiple things, which I think is what I ought to have been doing. Target his left control room and his right reactor at the same time. But it's easy enough to switch targets. And he nearly takes a lot more damage than he could have by being stuck on that asteroid, but he manages to get off. It's not a great position. Oh yes, that's where the rails come in. They can instantly punish. So now I'm in a much worse position, because I have I am a very wide target, and I don't have as much thrust, and thrust is very necessary for these ships to survive. A lot of the time, other ships can still fight for an extended amount of time after taking a lot of damage. These ships are an exception to that. They get very diminishing quality the more damage they take. So effectively I took a lot more damage than just a fourth in terms of effectiveness. Especially since Kawa can presumably punish with his boost thrusters and remaining nukes. Good use of the boost. His ship has a lot more boost than mine does for the sake of defensive purposes, I would guess. And he's spacing pretty effectively, I would say. Making sure to dodge nukes, making sure to not be in positions where I would launch them. A relevant part of this matchup is that you need to know when to not fire your nukes, because as you have limited ammo, just firing them constantly and wasting them will get you killed. Because then your opponent can just do whatever they want, because you can't space them away. So an important part of piloting these ships is knowing when to fire, and especially if they'll hit your opponent. As you can see there, I only fired 2 nukes because the rest of the segments were destroyed, and Kawa forfeits, thinking he can't win this, understandably. And for the last match today, we have Kawa using the Scion of Glory versus ZipZap's top ships, the bootleg Intergalactic Ballistic Missile. I'm assuming that's what this stands for. It could just be IGBM, like the letters. And in this case, Kawa is playing a lot farther away, because ZipZap is probably going to be more advantageous in terms of the proximity, because he has a lot of armor that can just tank the nukes for a while, whereas Kala mostly does not. He can tank like 4 nukes on each side, maybe just 3, maybe just 5. But I'm pretty sure that Zip Zap Zop, if the volley is not concentrated, can survive a entire volley of all of Kala's nukes if they hit the front. Asteroid saving, no, he takes a little bit of damage there, and Kala is trying to punish him because now he's in a unfortunately predictable pattern of movement because he got stuck on the asteroid, and he manages to lose, or Kala manages to take a small bite out of his left side, the top left side. But a fortunate part of Zip Zap Zop's ship is that he has so many more nukes. He has a lot more nukes. He doesn't waste as much money on thrust small lasers or other directions of thrust, which, I mean, you don't really need it, I guess. And by doing that, you can have more nukes, more redundancy, more defenses. Unfortunately, he hits the back of his ship again. That's a downside of that type of ship, is that the momentum will make it so that you will drift into your own nukes. He doesn't manage to rotate quickly enough, and those look like they're gonna hit. And Kala barely manages to rotate. They almost did him. But yeah, that's another advantage of the wall design, as previously mentioned, is that you can just rotate out of the way and completely shift where your ship is relatively. I mean, it's kind of, if you don't pilot your ship well, you're basically a large target, because, I mean, look at how wide Kala's ship is. That's like that's almost the 120 block limit that hits the build grid, I'm guessing. But the thing is, if you fly it diagonally or at an angle, you're only 30 blocks wide, and it's very easy to dodge all manner of projectiles. Zip Zap Zop is starting to take more and more damage. He's now down to 1 nuke side. Still mostly has his thrusters, so he can still get close and punish if Kala makes a mistake. And nukes are known for dealing a lot of damage, so it's not entirely too late. Kala uses small lasers to destroy the thrust. Now I think it's getting a little bit more dire. As you can see, Kala is taking largely no damage. All those are going to hit though. Nice. I think if there was one more, it would have gotten the reactor. As you can see, there's now a large hole there. And Zip Zap Zop is making sure to not pilot in such a fashion that he'd drift into his nukes again. Kala auto-firing his nukes because he knew that the momentum would carry Zip Zap Zop into them, then targeting these next ones, trying to get his control room or reactor with the small lasers. And Zip Zap Zop is largely out of thrusters, I think, so he can't really push as fast anymore. So it's now Kala's game, or Kala can dictate where and when fights happen, because Zip Zap Zop can't really get to him or escape from him, which is kind of unfortunate for him. And he is continuing to jockey, probably waiting for nukes to reload. Kala, I think, is down to the 4 small lasers because his supply lines have been cut, even if the lasers aren't gone. And Zip Zap Zop trying to turn to prevent his control room from being taken out. But Kala just has to go to the other side. To strafe to the other side, of course, which is what those ships are built for, excellent at. And he can't even really dodge the nukes anymore. Those didn't really do relevant damage, but it's telling that they can hit him so easily. I don't think that one's gonna hit because it was fired perpendicularly, which is the worst way to fire your nukes. Effectively. I mean, if your opponent is moving perpendicular to you and you fire nukes, it's basically guaranteed that they're not gonna hit, which is only hugely magnified by the fact of distance and momentum. So you always want to aim nukes when your opponent is not moving. When it doesn't have momentum, it is not moving perpendicular to you. And Zip Zap Zop loses his control room, and that's game.